still figuring out how to respond. Chrissy's voice trembled at first, but she quickly found her footing. There was no turning back now, and she knew that the truth was the only way forward. She could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her as she spoke. "I know you've been behind this," she said, her tone growing steadier. "The videos, everything. I want to know why you're lying and doing this to Jim." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Chrissy could almost feel the hesitation, as though the person on the other end was weighing the consequences of their next words. It felt like they were trying to decide whether or not to crack under the pressure. The tension in the conversation was thick, like a mind on the verge of explosion. Chrissy's grip on the situation tightened as she pressed for answers. "I need to know," she added, her voice now sharp and unwavering. "Who's pulling the strings? Here? Who decided that this was the path you were going to take?" Her words hung in the air, loaded with a mixture of anger and determination. At the other end, Chrissy could almost hear the calculations, the unwillingness to spill the entire truth. But deep down, she knew she had cornered them. They were running, out of excuses. The longer they paused, the closer Chrissy got to understanding the full extent of the betrayal. The power dynamics were shifting, and Chrissy was ready to face the harsh reality, no matter how uncomfortable it would be. Chrissy felt her heart skip a beat as Cameron's voice crackled through the phone, low and steady. "You don't get it," he said, his words dripping with cold certainty. "It's not about Jim. You..." He paused, making sure the weight of his words hit. "You've always been the focus. Together with your loyalty, you are the one who's been standing in the way. You've been protecting him, offering him protection, but you didn't know the full story about him, Chrissy. Did you?" The blood drained from her face, her grip tightening on the phone as she processed the words. A sense of numbness spread through her, her thoughts racing. What is he talking about? The confusion hit her like a tidal wave. She wanted to deny it, to brush it off as a manipulation tactic, but a creeping feeling of dread gnawed at her, tightening around her chest. Cameron's voice carried on, each word sharp, as if slicing through the layers of her confusion. "Jim's in too deep," he continued, his tone matter of fact. "He's been using ropes, pulling strings, executing moves with other people you don't even know. You've been in the dark this whole time, Chrissy." The floor beneath her seemed to vanish. The room felt colder, the walls pressing in on her as the weight of his words sank in. Too deep? Ropes? Moves with other people? Her mind scrambled for any logic, any explanation that could make sense of this, but nothing fit. Her heart pounded in her chest as she struggled to breathe, the reality of Cameron's revelation choking her. What was Jim really involved in? Chrissy had always known he had a past, a dangerous one, but she'd convinced herself it was behind him. Now, every doubt she had shoved aside came rushing back in full force. Cameron's next words echoed in her ears. "The truth, Chrissy, is that Jim's been playing you, and the moment you understand that, the pieces will start to fit." Cameron's words echoed in her mind, haunting her. "You've been blinded by love, but it's too late now." The cold finality in his voice hit Chrissy like a punch to the gut. Her grip on the phone tightened as she tried to process what he was saying. No getting out of this now? It felt like a trap closing in on her from all sides. "What do you mean? Harm both him and us?" Chrissy's voice trembled, her thoughts still scattered. She needed answers. She couldn't just sit back and let this unravel her life. "I'm not going to release something that will harm anyone." Cameron's voice cut through her confusion. "The reality is, Jim has been the one pulling the strings, but that's not the end of it." The line went dead abruptly, leaving Chrissy standing in the center of the room, overwhelmed by a storm of questions. What did he mean by pulling the strings? What strings? The more she thought about it, the deeper the pit in her stomach grew. Cameron had acknowledged the truth, but his cryptic words implied something far more dangerous, something she wasn't ready to face. In the days that followed, Chrissy's mind raced with new determination. She couldn't just let herself be passive in all of this. If her life, everything she had fought for, was being torn apart, she had to understand why. Cameron's cryptic statements had driven her to look deeper into his past, into the connections he had kept hidden from everyone. It wasn't just about Jim anymore. She needed to know the bigger picture. Her investigation led her to a chilling realization. Cameron, her supposed ally, wasn't just a passive player in all this. He had his own network, a web of relationships and secret dealings stretching back years. The more Chrissy uncovered, the clearer it became. She had been nothing more than a pawn in a far larger game. Jim, too, was a piece in this chessboard of betrayals and power plays. But now Chrissy saw that the game wasn't just about the streets. It was about something bigger, much bigger. The connections Cameron had within her world were far more significant than she could have ever imagined, and those connections were manipulating every part of her life. The realization left her reeling. This wasn't just about love or loyalty anymore. This was a power struggle that spanned far beyond her understanding. And now, as the pieces of the puzzle slowly started to fall into place, Chrissy found herself at the heart of it all, with her own future hanging in the balance. The what? Stories surrounding Chrissy had now spiraled into an even more complex web. It was no longer just about the betrayal she felt from Jim or the public's perception of her. The evidence released, texts, pictures, and videos, was all part of a much larger game. These weren't just meant to ruin her and Jim. They were carefully crafted to undermine Chrissy's sense of reality, to make her question everything she had known about herself and those around her. For Chrissy, this wasn't just about staying silent and allowing the people controlling the narrative to win. She wasn't ready to simply... The situation is more complicated than it appears on the surface, and if you think Jim isn't involved, insiders say otherwise. They claim he has been refusing to answer Chrissy's calls while she's been incarcerated, a stark contrast to the man who once stood by her side. In the end, Jim had left her behind, this same woman who had once been the focal point of career comebacks, disputes, and public battles. The reality of their relationship has evolved into something darker, with no easy explanations for the choices that led them here. Even after their breakup, Jim refuses to acknowledge Chrissy. The calls go unanswered, and reality begins to sink in for her. As Chrissy's court date approaches, the weight of the situation is taking its toll. She's been seen attending services twice, always with nighttime sunglasses, hiding the exhaustion. That seems to have consumed her. For a week, she walks with her head down, constantly checking her phone as if waiting for yet another shocking revelation to surface. Those close to her note that she isn't sleeping or eating, the pressure visibly wearing on her. Just when the story seemed to reach its breaking point, Cameron's sister stirred the pot. With the speed of a whisper, she dropped a bombshell. "You heard right," she posted. Along with it, she uploaded a black and white image of Chrissy and Jim, but there was no caption, only a single heartbreaking phrase and a broken heart emoji. You knew better. In less than 42 hours, that post gained over 80,000 likes, and the comments were a frenzy of chaos. People demanded Chrissy's side of the story, some even calling for a full-length reunion program to air, eager to hear her perspective. Chrissy, once known for her tough exterior and ability to survive the turbulence of her hip-hop love story, had become a symbol of both strength and vulnerability. Her relationship with Jim had always been turbulent, but the love that had once been their bond now felt distant, leaving fans and insiders wondering how this public saga would unfold. On the surface, Chrissy seemed invincible, but behind the scenes, the reality was far from perfect. The public never saw the late-night arguments, the quiet moments of fear that crept into her thoughts. She had stood by Jim for years, weathering his legal battles, the dangers tied to his street dealings, and the constant risks that hovered over him. But when those handcuffs clicked shut around his wrists, it felt as though the entire universe had shattered. The life she had built, one that she believed in, one that she thought she could control, came crashing down. It wasn't just because Jim had been arrested. The shockwave from that moment wasn't about his legal troubles. It was something deeper, something that had been unraveling quietly for much longer. The courts were never her domain, yet they had come crashing into her, life in a way she never imagined. The weight of it all wasn't simply about Jim's fall from grace, it was about everything that came with it. Everything she thought she could protect and hold together, now slipping through her fingers. What Chrissy didn't know, what had been kept hidden from her for so long, was now coming to light. The very people she had trusted had turned against her, and the cameras were now flashing in her face. Social media buzzed with rumors, and the truth started to unravel. Cameron's relatives, who had once been the people Jim had cast aside, were now holding the key to a deadly secret, one that no one had been prepared for. Hours after Jim's arrest, the revelations began to pour in. First came a series of private conversations between Jim and some of his most trusted associates. Then, the hands of Cameron's camp began to move. Her name, once synonymous with strength and resilience, now seemed to carry little weight. Chrissy was struggling, her world spinning out of control, when a surprise visit to the lawyer's office changed everything. After finishing her own tasks, for the day, she unexpectedly walked into the sterile, cold office. The weight of the situation, the strain on her shoulders, was palpable. But it was the attorney's next words that would alter the entire course of her story. "There's something you need to know," he said, his voice quiet, barely more than a murmur. Chrissy leaned in, unsure of what was coming next. "We've been keeping an eye on Cameron's family for some time," he continued. "They've been gathering proof." The air in the room seemed to grow heavier as the attorney's words sank in. The shock of what was unfolding, the revelation that her worst fears might be true, began to settle in. Chrissy wasn't prepared, for what lay ahead and what the lawyer was about to reveal would send her reeling into a new phase of her life, one filled with even more uncertainty and danger. The lawyer's words hit Chrissy like a ton of bricks. Cameron's family had been quietly gathering evidence against Jim, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. What she didn't know was that the evidence they had released to the public wasn't meant for widespread circulation. It was just a small piece of something much larger. Chrissy's heart raced as she tried to process what she was hearing. Her mind was flooded with questions. Who was pulling the strings behind this? What were Cameron's family hoping to achieve with this barrage of information? And most importantly, was Jim the man she had always believed him to be, or had she been blinded by love for all these years? As the days passed, Chrissy's stress levels mounted. The rumors only seemed to grow louder, and the frequency of the leaks increased. She struggled to keep her composure, to hold on to some sense of control, but it was becoming more and more difficult. Through it all, one feeling remained constant, a nagging sensation that something was missing. It lingered, growing stronger, with each passing day. Then, one late night, as Chrissy was once again scrolling through her phone, she stumbled upon something new. The message came from an unknown number, and the details were brief. But as she read the words, it became clear. She didn't realize just how bad things were about to get. The missing piece she had been searching for had finally arrived. Chrissy's hands trembled as she clicked the link, her breath catching in her throat as the video loaded. What she saw left her utterly stunned. A brand new video, never before noticed or shared, had surfaced. But this time, instead of Jim on the screen, it was someone she never expected to see. A face that wasn't supposed to be there. Jim was surrounded by his closest friends and associates, but in the middle of it all, there was Cameron, casually talking to Jim. The conversation felt strangely deliberate, almost as if Jim was being guided down a path he was never supposed to walk. It was a carefully orchestrated move, one that could bring down the care about the potential consequences. She knew that staying silent wasn't an option anymore. The world had already turned against her, and with Jim locked away in jail, his silence left her no choice but to fight this battle on her own. Chrissy had always been resilient, accustomed to the scrutiny of the public eye. She had lived through the worst before and emerged stronger, but this was different. This was more than just rumors and gossip. This was her entire life being ripped apart, and she wasn't about to let it end without a fight. Having turned her career into a reality TV sensation, she had become an expert in protecting the most vulnerable aspects of her personal life. But now, even the privacy she had fiercely guarded was being exposed in the most explosive way possible. It was a nightmare unfolding in front of millions, and Chrissy knew that if she wanted to reclaim any semblance of control, she had to act fast. So, in the dead of night, she made a decision that would change everything. She reached out to Cameron despite the risks. The move was bold, dangerous even, but Chrissy knew that Cameron, for all his strength and agendas, was still someone who could either help her or make her situation worse. It was a gamble, but at this point, it was the only card Chrissy had left to play. She knew she couldn't undo the damage done, but perhaps, just perhaps, she could steer the narrative in a direction that would allow her to come out on top, still figuring out how to respond. Chrissy's voice trembled at first, but she quickly found her footing. There was no turning back now, and she knew that the truth was the only way forward. She could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her as she spoke. "I know you've been behind this," she said, her tone growing steadier. "The videos, everything. I want to know why you're lying and doing this to Jim." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Chrissy could almost feel the hesitation, as though the person on the other end was weighing the consequences of their next words. It felt like they were trying to decide whether or not to crack under the pressure. The tension in the conversation was thick, like a mind on the verge of explosion. Chrissy's grip on the situation tightened as she pressed for answers. "I need to know," she added, her voice now sharp and unwavering. "Who's pulling the strings? Here? Who decided that this was the path you were going to take?" Her words hung in the air, loaded with a mixture of anger and determination. At the other end, Chrissy could almost hear the calculations, the unwillingness to spill the entire truth. But deep down, she knew she had cornered them. They were running, out of excuses. The longer they paused, the closer Chrissy got to understanding the full extent of the betrayal. The power dynamics were shifting, and Chrissy was ready to face the harsh reality, no matter how uncomfortable it would be. Chrissy felt her heart skip a beat as Cameron's voice crackled through the phone, low and steady. "You don't get it," he said, his words dripping with cold certainty. "It's not about Jim. He paused, making sure the weight of his words hit. "You've always been the focus. Together with your loyalty, you are the one who's been standing in the way. You've been protecting him, offering him protection. But you didn't know the full story about him, Chrissy. Did you?" The blood drained from her face, her grip tightening on the phone as she processed the words. A sense of numbness spread through her thoughts racing. What is he talking about? The confusion hit her like a tidal wave. She wanted to deny it, to brush it off as a manipulation tactic. But a creeping feeling of dread gnawed at her, tightening around her chest. Cameron's voice carried on, each word sharp, as if slicing through the layers of her confusion. "Jim's in too deep," he continued, his tone matter of fact.